The sun-scorched summer of 1876 cast merciless heat across the Montana Territory as Clara Zimmerman's father dragged her through the dusty streets of Stillwater Creek by her arm, her pleading tears doing nothing to soften his granite resolve. At 20 years old, Clara had committed the unforgivable sin of refusing to marry the wealthy banker. Her family had chosen a man 3 decades her senior with cold eyes and hands that wandered inappropriately whenever they were left alone. "You've disgraced us for the last time," Edward Zimmerman growled, his voice carrying the bitter edge of whiskey despite the early hour. "If you won't do what's proper, you'll learn what happens to disobedient daughters." Clara stumbled to keep pace, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins as townsfolk stared openly at the spectacle. Her mother followed several paces behind, eyes downcast in shame or perhaps silent disagreement. Clara couldn't tell anymore. Her 2 younger sisters had been forbidden from witnessing this final humiliation. "Please, father," she whispered, though she knew her pleas were futile. Edward Zimmerman had built his mercantile empire through ruthless determination, and when crossed, that same determination transformed into something cruel. They marched toward the sheriff's office where, Clara had learned only hours before, arrangements had been made. Sheriff Mills, a longtime associate of her father's, had agreed to send her away as unpaid labor to a remote cattle ranch owned by someone called Nathaniel Burke, a man Clara had never met. Her crime? Refusing to marry a man her father's age and daring to dream of a life where she might choose her own path. The sheriff's office door swung open as they approached, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the interior lamplight. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as her fate materialized before her. Nathaniel Burke removed his hat as they approached, revealing a weathered face no older than 30. His eyes, a striking blue that reminded Clara of the summer sky after a storm, assessed the situation with quiet intensity. "Mr. Zimmerman," he acknowledged with a nod, his voice deeper than Clara expected. "Sheriff Mills said you had a proposition." Edward's grip tightened on Clara's arm. "My daughter needs discipline, Burke. She's willful, disobedient. The sheriff says you're short-handed at your ranch. She'll work for you cooking, cleaning, whatever you need until she learns respect." Clara lowered her gaze, shame and anger warring within her. She'd known her father was strict, but never imagined he would cast her out like unwanted livestock. "And what does your daughter think of this arrangement?" Burke asked, his gaze shifting to Clara. The question startled her. No one had asked what she thought in weeks. "Her thoughts aren't relevant," her father snapped. "She's proven she can't make sensible decisions." Burke studied Clara for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze, determined not to appear as broken as she felt. "I need help at my ranch," Burke said finally, addressing her directly. "But I won't take anyone against their will, Mr. Zimmerman. That's not how I conduct my affairs." Edward's face flushed with anger. "She's my daughter. I've already made arrangements with Mills." "Then unmake them," Burke replied calmly. "Miss Zimmerman, do you wish to come work at my ranch? It's hard work, fair warning. 30 miles from town, isolated. But you'd have your own quarters, regular meals, and I'd pay you a proper wage." Clara's eyes widened at the mention of payment. Her father had clearly expected her to be treated as an indentured servant. Before she could respond, her father cut in. "There will be no payment. She goes as punishment or not at all." Burke's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Then not at all, sir. Good day to you." As he turned to leave, Clara found her voice. "Wait." The desperation in her tone made both men pause. "I'll go," she said firmly. "Without pay if necessary." Anything was better than returning home to face her father's wrath and the impending marriage he would surely force upon her now. At least at a distant ranch, she might find space to breathe, to think. Burke studied her, then nodded once. "Get your belongings. We leave within the hour." "She has nothing to bring," her father declared. She forfeited her possessions when she defied me. Clara watched something flash in Burke's eyes, anger. Perhaps, but his voice remained level. Then we'll manage. He turned to Clara. Wait here. Burke disappeared into the sheriff's office, returning minutes later with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Basic necessities, he explained. We can get more supplies on the way. Her mother, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly stepped forward and pressed something into Clara's hand, a small brooch, the only item of value her mother possessed. Mother, I can't take it, she whispered, eyes darting nervously to Edward. For emergencies. Clara clutched the brooch tightly as her father yanked her mother back. You've made your choice, Edward said coldly to Clara. Don't expect to be welcomed back when this cowboy tires of you. Burke's jaw tightened. I've hired Miss Zimmerman as my housekeeper, Mr. Zimmerman. She will be treated with the respect due any employee in my household. Without waiting for a response, Burke guided Clara toward a wagon parked nearby. I'll need to collect a few more supplies before we head out, he explained, helping her climb onto the wooden seat. Clara nodded, unable to speak as the reality of her situation settled around her. She watched her parents walk away, her father's back rigid with anger, her mother's shoulders slumped in defeat, and felt a curious mixture of terror and relief. Miss Zimmerman, Burke said gently as he took the reins. I want to be clear about something. You're not a prisoner at my ranch. If at any point you wish to leave, I'll bring you back to town, though perhaps not to your father's doorstep. Clara studied his profile as he guided the horses down the main street. His features were strong, his expression serious, but not unkind. She noticed calloused hands that spoke of hard work and a certain careful manner to his movements. Why did you offer me a job? She asked finally. You don't know me. Burke kept his eyes on the road. I know enough. No one deserves to be discarded, Miss Zimmerman. And contrary to what your father thinks, I don't need a slave. I need someone who can cook decent meals and keep the house in order while I tend the cattle. They stopped at the general store, where Burke purchased additional supplies, clothing for Clara, toiletries, and extra food for the journey. The shopkeeper's wife helped select items in Clara's size, her sympathetic glances suggesting she understood more than she said about Clara's situation. As they finally left town behind, Clara felt the weight of watching eyes lift from her shoulders. The vast Montana landscape opened before them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the summer air fragrant with wildflowers and sage. It's a day's journey to the ranch, Burke explained. We'll make camp tonight and arrive tomorrow afternoon. Clara nodded, stealing glances at her new employer. Mr. Burke, I should tell you that I've never been a housekeeper before. I can cook basic meals, but you'll learn, he said simply. And it's Nate. Mr. Burke was my father. They traveled until sunset, stopping near a small creek. Nate efficiently set up camp while Clara, eager to prove her usefulness, gathered firewood. She watched carefully as he built a fire, determined to remember the technique. Over a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee, Nate explained more about the ranch. It's not grand, he told her. 200 acres, mostly for cattle grazing. The house is small but solid. I built it myself after coming west 5 years ago. You're from the East? Clara asked, finding herself curious about this man who had so unexpectedly altered her fate. Pennsylvania originally, he nodded. Came west after the war. Needed open sky after too many years of smoke and gunfire. The mention of war explained something about him, a certain vigilance in his posture, perhaps, or the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. Your family, she ventured.
Gone.
Father died before the war. Mother just after. No siblings. He poured more coffee. What about you? Besides the parents I met today. Clara described her sisters Emma, 17, and Lily, 15, both still firmly under their father's control. She spoke of her mother, once vibrant but now subdued by years of Edward Zimmerman's domineering presence. And the man your father wanted you to marry? Nate asked perceptively. Clara's hands tightened around her tin cup. Harold Wickham. A banker, widowed 3 times. Each wife younger than the last. She hesitated. He has wandering hands and cruel eyes. Nate's expression darkened. And your father knew this? He said I was being dramatic. That a secure future was worth accommodating a husband's nature. The fire crackled between them as Nate processed this. Your father is wrong, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. No security is worth surrendering your dignity. That night, as Clara lay in the bedroll Nate had purchased for her positioned respectfully on the opposite side of the fire, she realized she had slept under the stars only once before, on a family picnic when she was very young. Despite everything, a strange sense of freedom washed over her as she gazed up at the vast canopy of stars, brighter here than she'd ever seen them in town. They reached the Burke Ranch the following afternoon, cresting a gentle hill to reveal a modest homestead nestled in a sheltered valley. A small, sturdy cabin with a front porch stood near a barn and corral. A creek wound through the property, bordered by cottonwoods and willows. In the distance, cattle grazed on rolling grasslands. It's beautiful, Clara said honestly, taking in the peaceful scene. Nate's expression softened with pride. It's not much compared to town life, but it's mine. Paid for free and clear last year. As they approached, a border collie raced out to greet them, followed by an older man who emerged from the barn. That's Samuel, Nate explained. He helps with the cattle. Lives in a small cabin beyond the barn. The only other person you'll see regularly around here. Samuel, gray-haired but spry, welcomed them with obvious curiosity about Clara's presence. Nate introduced her simply as Miss Zimmerman, our new housekeeper, offering no explanation about the circumstances of her arrival. The cabin was indeed small, 2 bedrooms, a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a lean-to addition that housed a washroom. Simple but clean, with handcrafted furniture that spoke of Nate's skill with woodworking. This will be your room, Nate said, showing her to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. I had Samuel air it out when I was in town. It hasn't been used in some time. The room contained a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the creek and distant hills. It's perfect, Clara said, meaning it despite the room's simplicity. After the drama of the previous day, this quiet space felt like sanctuary. I'll let you get settled, Nate said. Usually I'd expect dinner around sundown, but given the circumstances, perhaps we can manage with cold supplies tonight. Tomorrow you can familiarize yourself with the kitchen. Clara insisted on preparing a proper meal despite their journey, determined to begin as she meant to continue. Searching through the supplies they'd purchased and what was available in the pantry, she managed to produce a respectable stew and biscuits. Samuel joined them for the meal, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of home-cooked food. Been living on beans and coffee whenever the boss is away, he confided to Clara. This is a welcome change, Miss Zimmerman. That first week established a routine. Clara rose early to prepare breakfast before Nate and Samuel headed out to work the cattle. She spent her days cleaning the long-neglected cabin, organizing the pantry, and doing laundry. In the evenings, she prepared dinner, which they ate together on the porch if weather permitted. Nate was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance. He never entered her room, always knocked before entering the house when she was alone inside, and spoke to her with a respect she found both comforting and occasionally frustrating when she caught herself wishing for more personal conversation. On her 8th day at the ranch, Clara was hanging laundry when she noticed a rider approaching. Her heart lurched with momentary fear that her father had come to reclaim her, but as the figure drew closer, she recognized the local doctor who occasionally visited isolated homesteads. Dr. Wilson dismounted with a friendly wave. Miss Zimmerman, I presume? Word travels fast in these parts. I make rounds to the outlying ranches every few weeks." He had brought mail and news from town, including a small package that he handed to Clara. "From your mother," he explained. "She caught me before I left town." Tears pricked Clara's eyes as she accepted the carefully wrapped parcel. Inside, she found a small Bible, a few hair ribbons, and a brief note. "Be well. I pray for your happiness daily." Dr. Wilson stayed for lunch, regaling Clara with stories of his patients, while she served him the rabbit stew she'd prepared. When talk turned to Nate, the doctor's expression grew thoughtful. "Burke's a good man," he said. "Keeps to himself mostly, but always first to help when someone's in need. Lost his wife before coming west. Typhoid took her, I believe. Never speaks of it." This revelation about Nate's past surprised Clara. She'd assumed he was a lifelong bachelor, given his solitary nature. When Nate returned that evening, Clara hesitated before mentioning the doctor's visit. Dr. Wilson stopped by. He brought mail. Nate nodded, washing up at the basin. "He comes through every month or so. Good man," he mentioned. "He said you were married once." Nate's hand stilled. For a moment, Clara feared she'd overstepped, but then he nodded slowly.
"Sarah.
"We married young, before the war. She died while I was fighting at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "It was a lifetime ago." He dried his hands. "What's for dinner?" "Smells good." The subject was closed, but something had shifted between them. A small barrier had fallen away with this piece of shared history. As summer progressed into early autumn, Clara found herself settling into ranch life with unexpected ease. The isolation that had initially seemed daunting became peaceful. She started a small vegetable garden, learned to make soap using rendered fat and lye, and even convinced Nate to teach her to ride one of the gentler horses. Their evenings lengthened as they began to share more of themselves. Nate spoke of his time in the war, of coming west to escape memories, of building the ranch from nothing. Clara told him about growing up as the daughter of the town's most prominent businessman, about her love of books, about dreams she'd harbored of perhaps becoming a teacher before her father declared such notions foolish. "You still could," Nate observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching distant lightning illuminate the mountains. "Teach, I mean. There's no school for 50 miles in any direction. Plenty of ranch families with children who get no formal education." The idea took root in Clara's mind. She began collecting what books she could, making notes on teaching methods she remembered from her own schooling. Nate, seeing her enthusiasm, built a small bookshelf for her room. Their growing closeness remained respectful but undeniable. Clara caught herself watching Nate as he worked around the ranch, the way sunlight caught his hair, how his hands moved with confidence, whether handling tools or calming a nervous horse. Sometimes she'd look up to find his eyes on her, quickly averted when she noticed. The first real test of their evolving relationship came with the autumn roundup. Nate hired additional hands temporarily, rough men who looked at Clara with obvious interest despite Nate's clear warning that she was under his protection. One evening while Nate was working late with the cattle, a cowhand named Tucker cornered Clara in the barn where she'd gone to collect eggs. His liquor-laced breath made her step back in alarm. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be hidden away out here," he slurred, blocking her exit. "Bet Burke's keeping you all to himself, ain't he?" "Mr. Burke is my employer," Clara said firmly, clutching the egg basket. "Nothing more. Now please move aside." Tucker stepped closer. "Don't believe that for a minute. Man doesn't keep a woman like you around just to cook his meals." Before Clara could respond, Tucker was yanked backward, Nate's hand fisted in his collar. "She asked you to move," Nate said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Meant no harm, Burke," Tucker stammered. "Just making conversation." "Get your gear and get off my property," Nate replied. "Your pay's waiting with Samuel." After Tucker slunk away, Nate turned to Clara, his expression tight with concern. "Did he hurt you?" No, she assured him. He just frightened me. Nate nodded, visibly relieved. I'm sorry. I should have been more careful about who I hired. That night, Clara found it difficult to sleep, replaying the incident and Nate's protective response. His reaction had gone beyond what an employer might show for a servant. There had been something personal in his anger, something possessive in the way he'd positioned himself between her and danger. The following morning brought the first frost of the season, coating the grass with silver. Clara was preparing breakfast when Nate entered, his expression troubled. I've been thinking, he said without preamble. What happened yesterday, it won't be the last time. Men out here, they see a woman alone, they make assumptions. Clara nodded, unsure where he was heading with this conversation. I respect you too much to presume, Nate continued carefully. But I wonder if you've given any thought to your future. Whether you plan to stay on here or perhaps return to town eventually. The question caught Clara off guard. She'd been living day to day, focusing on immediate tasks rather than long-term plans. The thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Nate, created an unexpected hollowness in her chest. I haven't decided, she answered honestly. I can't return to my father's house, that much I know. Nate nodded, seeming to choose his next words with care. There's another option you might consider. It would change things between us, but it might offer you more security. Clara's heart quickened. What option? Marriage, he said simply. A marriage of convenience, if you will. You'd have my name, my protection. No one would question your presence here. Clara felt a curious mixture of disappointment and hope. A marriage of convenience, not love. Yet something in Nate's eyes suggested there might be more behind his proposal than mere practicality. And what would you gain from such an arrangement? She asked carefully. A partner, he replied. Someone to share the burdens of this place. The winters are long here, Clara. The solitude wears on a person after a while. She noticed his use of her given name the first time he'd allowed himself that intimacy. Would there be expectations? She asked, heat rising to her cheeks. Nate's expression softened. Only those we both agree to. I would never ask more of you than you're willing to give. Clara considered his offer, weighing the practical benefits against the knowledge that her feelings for Nate had already grown beyond those of an employee for her employer. Would it be harder or easier to live as his wife in name only, knowing she wished for more? May I have time to consider? She asked finally. Of course, he agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. For the next week, a new tension threaded through their interactions, not unpleasant, but charged with unspoken possibilities. Clara found Nate watching her more openly now, as if her awareness of his interest had freed him to show it. She wrote to her mother, careful not to include anything that might anger her father if he intercepted the letter, but hinting at her dilemma. The reply came with surprising swiftness. Follow your heart, not duty. I'm married for the latter, and have regretted it for 20 years. The decision crystallized for Clara one evening as she watched Nate reading by lamplight, his face intent on the page of a dog-eared copy of the Iliad. The simple domesticity of the moment, the comfort of his presence, the growing certainty that her feelings were reciprocated all pointed toward one answer. Yes, she said suddenly. Nate looked up, momentarily confused. Yes. To your proposal, Clara clarified, her voice steadier than she'd expected. I'll marry you, Nate. He set the book aside, studying her face. You're certain? I don't want you to feel obligated. I'm certain, she confirmed. But I should be honest about something. My feelings for you. They're not merely practical. The confession hung between them until Nate stood and crossed to where she sat by the fire. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Clara, he said softly, I offered a marriage of convenience because I didn't dare hope for more. But if you're saying what I think you're saying, I'm saying I care for you, she whispered. More than as my employer, more than as a friend. The kiss that followed was gentle, questioning at first, then deeper as Clara responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day we crossed that creek together," he admitted. "But I was determined not to be like the men you were escaping. I needed you to come to me of your own free will, or not at all." They were married 2 weeks later by a traveling preacher who included the Burke Ranch in his circuit. Samuel stood as witness, beaming like a proud father. Clara wore a new dress Nate had ordered from the mercantile in town and carried wildflowers gathered that morning. Their wedding night was a revelation for Clara. Nate's tenderness, his patient guidance, transformed what she had feared would be an ordeal into an expression of genuine affection. In the intimate darkness of their now-shared bedroom, barriers fell away completely as they discovered each other fully for the first time. As winter settled over the ranch, blanketing the valley in snow, Clara and Nate settled into a new rhythm as husband and wife. They worked side by side during daylight hours and spent evenings planning for the future, expanding the garden in spring, possibly adding a room to the cabin, and Clara's growing dream of starting a small school for neighboring ranch children. Word reached them in January that Edward Zimmerman had suffered financial setbacks, his business empire crumbling under questionable investments. Clara's mother wrote that they would be moving to Denver to live with a relative. "Do you regret not being there?" Nate asked as Clara read the letter aloud. She looked around the cozy cabin at the Christmas decorations they'd made together still hanging from the rafters, at the half-finished quilt she was stitching for their bed, at the man who had offered her dignity when her own father had tried to strip it away. "No," she said honestly. "My life is here now. With you." Spring brought new calves, fresh growth in Clara's expanded garden, and unexpected news from town. Dr. Wilson, making his regular visit, mentioned that Clara's sisters had been asking about her. "Your father's gone to Denver," he explained, "but the girls stayed behind with your aunt. They're quite concerned about you." With Nate's encouragement, Clara invited her sisters to visit. Their reunion was tearful but joyous, and Clara found herself proudly showing them around the ranch, introducing them to Samuel and the animals, explaining her plans for a small school. "You seem happy," Emma observed as they sat by the creek. "Truly happy." "I am," Clara confirmed, watching Nate in the distance as he mended a fence, occasionally glancing their way. "It wasn't the life I expected, but it's become the one I would choose over any other." On the 1-year anniversary of Clara's arrival at the ranch, Nate presented her with a gift, a hand-carved sign reading Zimmerman School, to hang on the small outbuilding he'd converted for her first classes. 7 children enrolled so far, he told her proudly. Word spreading about the new schoolmarm at Burke Ranch. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Clara leaned against Nate's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day in town?" she asked. "When my father tried to give me away as punishment?" Nate's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. I thank God I was there that day, though I hate the circumstances that brought you to me." "It's strange," Clara mused. "He meant it as punishment, but it led me to everything I never knew I wanted: freedom, purpose, love." Nate turned to face her, his expression serious. "I promised myself that first day that you would never be treated as property on this ranch, that you would always have choices. And I chose you," Clara said simply. "Every day, I choose you." The Montana sunset deepened into twilight as they sat together, no longer employer and housekeeper, but partners in every sense, equals who had found in each other the acceptance and respect they both deserved. What had begun as an act of cruelty had transformed into something beautiful, a love built on honor and choice rather than obligation. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Clara thought of how far she had come from that terrified young woman being dragged through town. Her father had given her away as punishment, but Nate had given her something far more valuable: the dignity of making her own choices, and a love that honored rather than diminished her worth.